Family kicked me out on my birthday. Now they're trying to claim my business. My brother showed up saying, "We built this together." I laughed and said, "You mean while I slept in my car and you lived in mom's basement?" Then I pulled out the ownership deed and watched their faces drop. I never expected to spend my 29th birthday in my car, parked behind an old gas station, trying to figure out how the hell my life had come to this. I sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the dimly lit parking lot, the engine off to save gas, my breath fogging up the windshield. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I wasn't in the mood to eat. My duffel bag sat in the passenger seat, stuffed with what little my mother had let me take before she and my stepfather locked the door behind me. I should have seen it coming. Earlier that evening, I walked into my mom's house, expecting a quiet birthday dinner. Nothing fancy, just a meal with family. My stepfather Dale wasn't the sentimental type, and my mother had never been big on birthdays, but she'd called me that morning, telling me to be there by 6. So I showed up, like in a holy, thinking they cared. Alec, my younger brother, greeted me at the door with his usual CCKY grin, the kind that always made me feel like he knew something I didn't. "Hey, big man. Happy birthday." He slapped my back a little too hard as I stepped inside. I should have turned around right then. Mom was in the kitchen, setting the table, avoiding my eyes. Dale was already at the head of the table, beer in hand, staring at the TV in the living room like he didn't even notice I was there. "Smells good," I said, forcing a smile as I sat down. Mom muttered something about the roast taking longer than she wanted. Alec plopped down across from me, scrolling on his phone, not bothering to help. Same as always. We ate mostly in silence, except for Alec talking about his latest business venture, which was just another way of saying he was trying to find a way to make quick money without actually working for it. Then Mom cleared her throat and put her fork down. "I think it's time you moved out, Quentin." At first, I thought I misheard her. I blinked, glancing between her and Dale. Alec had a smirk on his face like he'd been waiting for this. "Sorry, what?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. Dale sighed, taking a swig of his beer. "You've been here long enough. You're a grown man. You should be on your own by now." I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing I could do to stop the rush of anger clawing at my chest. "Are you serious?" I asked. "I work full-time. I pay for groceries. I help with bills when you guys forget." I shot a look at my mother, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. "And you're kicking me out? On my birthday?" Alec leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms like he was enjoying the show. "Come on, man. It's not that deep. It's time for you to get your own place." "You mean while you're still crashing here in the basement?" I snapped. His smirk disappeared. "I help around here." I scoffed. Alec didn't do crap. He slept all day, went out at night, and spent whatever money he had on gambling or whatever half-assed scheme he was into that month. Mom let out a tired sigh. "Dale and I need our space, Quentin. We're getting older. We can't have you living here forever." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "So that's it. You're just done with me." "Don't be dramatic," Dale muttered. Alec grinned. "Look, man, just pack a bag, find a cheap apartment, and get over it. You'll be fine." That was the moment I realized it had never been my home. Not really. I'd spent years bending over backward trying to prove I was worth keeping around, doing everything I could to be useful, but in the end, they didn't care. Mom stood up and walked into the hall. A minute later, she came back with my duffel bag, already packed. I stared at it, then at her. "You packed my stuff before I got here." My voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Dale stood up. "I think it's time you left." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out the front door without another word. Alec called after me, laughing. "Don't forget to blow out your candles." I didn't look back. 2 years later, Alec showed up at my business, acting like he owned the place. I had worked my SS off for this. After sleeping in my car for months, showering at the gym, eating cheap gas station sandwiches, and barely scraping by, I finally built something for myself. It started small, just a side hustle fixing up old furniture and reselling it online. Then it turned into a full-fledged woodworking business. I got a small workshop, then a storefront, then a loyal customer base. I poured everything into it. My time, my energy, my sweat, my tears. And now Alex stood in my office, arms crossed, looking around like he belonged here. "We built this together," he said, grinning like this was some kind of joke. "You wouldn't have made it without me." I laughed, actually laughed. A full, deep, belly laugh. "You mean while I was sleeping in my car and you were living in Mom's basement?" I shook my head, pulling out a folder from my desk. I flipped it open and slid a piece of paper across the desk toward him. "Go ahead. Read it." He frowned, picking it up. As his eyes scanned the words, the color drained from his face. "This." His voice cracked. "This says you own everything." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "That's right. I own everything. The business, the building, the trademarks. Every single thing under this roof. It's mine." Alex swallowed hard. "Mom said, I don't give a damn what Mom said. My voice was sharp, cold. She made it pretty clear where I stood when she threw me out like trash. You all did. His jaw tightened. Look, man, I was just a kid back then. You were 26. He shifted uncomfortably. I just thought you'd wanna, share the success. I smirked. Like how you shared a home with me when I had nowhere to go. Silence. I stood up, walking around the desk until I was right in front of him. Get the HLL out of my business. His face twisted in anger. You're seriously gonna turn your back on your family? I took another step forward, lowering my voice. I didn't turn my back on my family. You turned your back on me. For the first time, Alec didn't have a snarky comeback. He just stood there, fists clenched, breathing heavily. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out the door. As soon as he was gone, I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. For the first time in years, I finally felt free. I watched Alec stomp out of my office, slamming the door behind him so hard the glass rattled. I let out a slow breath and leaned against my desk, my fingers drumming against the wood. My heart was still pounding, not with fear, not with regret, but with something close to satisfaction. For years, I had been the one bending, breaking, sacrificing. The one who got left behind, discarded, treated like an afterthought. And now, when I had finally built something for myself, Alec thought he could waltz in and lay claim to it? Unbelievable. I reached for my coffee, but it had gone cold. With a sigh, I pushed myself up and walked to the window, pulling back the blinds just enough to see Alec standing in the parking lot, talking furiously on his phone. I couldn't hear him, but I could guess exactly who he was calling. Mom. I shook my head, letting the blinds snap shut. I knew this wasn't over. Alec never fought his own battles. He whined and complained until someone else fought them for him. And there was only one person who would take his side without question. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang barely 10 minutes later. I stared at the screen, not surprised in the slightest to see Mom flashing across it. I let it ring. Then, when it stopped, it started again. And again. And again. On the fifth call, I sighed and picked up. Yeah. Her voice was sharp, clipped. What the HLL is wrong with you? I rubbed my temple. Nice to hear from you too, Mom. Don't give me that. Alec just called me in tears. I almost laughed at that. Tears, huh? He must have been digging deep for those. Quentin. Her voice was nice. I raised you better than this. My grip tightened on the phone. Raised me better than this. I exhaled through my nose. What do you want, Mom? You know damn well what I want, she snapped. Alec told me you refused to let him have any part of the business. Let him. I cut in, my voice sharp. He's never worked a single day for it. He's never put in the hours, never lifted a damn finger to help me when I was struggling. He is not entitled to anything I built. He's family. That one word made my stomach turn. Family. They always pulled that card when they wanted something. I let out a humorless laugh. You mean like how I was family when you kicked me out on my birthday? Like how I was family when you let me sleep in my car, while Alec got to stay nice and comfortable in your house? There was silence on the other end. Then, a softer voice. I thought you'd moved past that, Quentin. I closed my eyes. Moved past what exactly? Being treated like I didn't matter? Having to claw my way out of nothing while you and Alec pretended I didn't exist? You're being dramatic. There it was. The same dismissive tone. The same way she always swept my feelings aside like they were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. I swallowed the lump in my throat. If all you called for was to guilt-trip me into giving Alex something he doesn't deserve, then you're wasting your time. He's your brother, she said, voice tight. You owe him. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I don't owe him a damn thing. Mom exhaled sharply. I didn't raise you to be selfish. I almost threw my phone across the room. Instead, I pressed it harder against my ear. Selfish? Selfish? Do you have any idea how hard I worked to get here? How many nights did I sleep in my car? How many times have I gone to bed hungry because I was putting every last dime into this business? Meanwhile, Alec was warm and fed in your house, blowing his money on bullcrap, and you think I'm the selfish one. More silence. Then, a low, venomous reply. I see who you really are now. I let out a breathless laugh. That makes two of us. I hung up before she could say another word. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if it was from anger or relief or something in between. I pressed my palms against my desk, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. Mom, you're going to regret this. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, I turned off my phone. I had a bad feeling this was far from over. The next morning, I pulled into the parking lot of my business with my coffee in one hand and a headache pounding at my temples. After the call with Mom, I hadn't slept much. Even after all these years, even after everything they had done, her words still stuck to me like tar. You're going to regret this. I should have brushed it off. She'd always been good at throwing out threats, most of which amounted to nothing. But this time, something about the way she said it unsettled me. As I got out of my truck, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Alec's car. It was parked right in front of the building, taking up 2 spaces like in Shoal. I let out a slow breath and forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he's just here to apologize, I thought. But even as I considered it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. Alec never apologized. He justified, he excused, he manipulated, but he never apologized. I walked inside, my boots echoing against the polished concrete floor of the showroom. There he was, sitting on the edge of my front desk like he owned the place, twirling a pen between his fingers. "Morning, partner," he said, grinning. I dropped my keys onto the desk with a loud clunk and crossed my arms. "What the HLL are you doing here, Alec?" He spread his hands. "Just checking in on our business." I exhaled sharply through my nose. "Our business?" He nodded, completely unfazed by my glare. "Yeah, man. Look, I was thinking about it last night, and I realized we just got off on the wrong foot. I mean, sure, you technically started this place, but come on, you wouldn't have gotten here without me." I barked out a laugh. "Without you? What exactly did you do to help me, Alec?" He rolled his eyes like I was being difficult. "Dude, I've always had your back." I took a slow step forward. "You mean when I was sleeping in my car? When I was barely making enough to eat? Where the HLL were you then?" Alex scratched the back of his head. "That was a rough time for all of us." "For all of us?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You were living rent-free in Mom's basement while I was working 18-hour days just to keep myself from starving." Alex sighed, standing up. "Look, man, we can argue about the past all day, but what's the point? I'm here now, and I want in." I crossed my arms. "Not happening." His jaw tightened. "I figured you'd say that." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My gut twisted. "What is that?" He smirked. "A legal claim." I snatched it from his hands and unfolded it, scanning the words. My stomach dropped. Alec was suing me for half of my business. I looked up at him, barely holding back the urge to put my fist through his face. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" He shrugged. "Mom talked to a lawyer. Said I have a case. Said that since I helped in the early stages, I have a claim to partial ownership." I clenched my jaw. "You didn't help with crap, Alec." "Maybe, but I said I helped. And with Mom backing me up? Well, the courts might see it differently." I inhaled deeply, trying to keep myself from lunging at him. "You're seriously pulling this?" Alex shrugged again. "Hey man, it's nothing personal. It's just business." I stared at him, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Then I did something that must have shocked him, because for the first time since he walked in, his smug grin faltered. I laughed. A slow, quiet, humorless laugh that sent a flicker of uncertainty across his face. "You really think you can beat me?" I asked, shaking my head. Alex scoffed. "It's not about beating you, bro. It's about getting what I deserve." I leaned in, dropping my voice to a low whisper. "You deserve nothing." His face darkened, but before he could say anything, I snatched the paper from his hands and ripped it in half, then in half again, letting the shredded pieces flutter to the floor between us. His eyes widened. "You can't just get the HLL out of my building, Alec," I said, voice low and deadly. "Now." He stared at the torn pieces of paper, then back at me, his hands curled into fists, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, finally, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers against my temples. I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And I was right. Because 2 days later, I got served with real court papers. Alec was taking me to court. When I saw the envelope sitting on my desk, my stomach dropped. It was thick, way too thick for a simple letter. My name was printed on the front in bold, official font, and even before I touched it, I knew exactly what it was. Legal documents. Alec had actually gone through with it. I sat down, running a hand down my face before ripping it open. Plaintiff, Alec Hartman. Defendant, Quentin Hartman. My own brother was suing me. I skimmed through the pages, my pulse pounding in my ears. His claim was as ridiculous as I expected. He was alleging that he had played a vital role in the early stages of the business and was therefore entitled to half of my company's assets and revenue. I nearly laughed. Vital role? The only thing Alec had ever contributed to my business was his constant whining about how he was thinking of helping me someday. But the more I read, the angrier I got. He wasn't just trying to take money from me. He was trying to take my entire business apart. The document claimed that since I had started the company while I was technically still living under my mother's roof, even though I was sleeping in my damn car, it could be argued that I used family resources to get the company off the ground. That was Mom's doing. She was behind this. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. Of course, Alec wouldn't have come up with this himself. He was lazy, but he wasn't SDPID. This was too well-crafted, too calculated. He didn't have the patience to go through all these legal steps. Mom had put him up to this. I shoved the papers aside and grabbed my phone, dialing before I could stop myself. She picked up on the third ring. "Quentin." There was no warmth in her voice, just cold indifference. I gritted my teeth. "So this is how it is now? You're really backing him on this?" She let out a slow sigh. "I told you, Quentin. You're going to regret being so selfish." I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of my desk. "This isn't just some petty argument, Mom. He's trying to steal from me. Don't be so dramatic. There it was. That same dismissive tone. The same way she used to brush off everything I ever said when I was growing up. I forced a bitter laugh. You always did take his side, didn't you? He's your brother. I could practically see her standing there, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line like she was scolding a child for not sharing their toys. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. He's a leech, Mom. He's never worked a day in his life. And instead of telling him to get his crap together, you're helping him try to take what I built. She didn't answer. I shook my head. You know what? Fine. You want to back him? Go ahead. But if you think I'm just going to roll over and let this happen, you've lost your damn mind. Still, she said nothing. So I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing for her. The next few weeks were HLL. I had to hire a lawyer, an expensive one, because Alec was actually pushing forward with the lawsuit. And thanks to Mom's funding, he had a real legal team behind him. The worst part? The case wasn't as ridiculous as I thought. Mom's house, the place I was kicked out of, was technically where I had first started working on my business. I used her garage to refinish my first few furniture pieces. I used her Wi-Fi to make my first sales online. I used her address to register the business in the early days. And Alec was arguing that because of that, he and Mom had a stake in my company. It was bullcrap, but it was dangerous. And then, things got worse. One afternoon, I got a text from my lawyer. We need to talk ASAP. Urgent. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to his office. The moment I walked in, he handed me a folder. His face was grim. Your brother and mother are trying to claim you committed fraud during the business registration process. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. What? They're claiming that you illegally filed as a sole proprietor while using shared family resources. They're saying that since you didn't disclose that you were using the property and utilities at the time, your registration wasn't legally valid. I stared at him, barely able to process what I was hearing. They're trying to invalidate my entire business? He nodded. If they win, your company could be dissolved. I felt cold. This wasn't about Alec wanting a cut. This was about Mom wanting to burn everything I built to the ground. And for the first time in my life, I realized my own mother wanted to ruin me. I sat in my lawyer's office, gripping the armrests of my chair so tightly my fingers ached. My own mother, my own blood, was trying to erase everything I had worked for. Not take half. Not negotiate. Destroy it. And for what? Because I refused to let Alec mooch off me the way he had offer? Because I dared to build something for myself when they left me with nothing? I clenched my jaw. No. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they could pull the rug out from under me and take everything I had built. But they were wrong. Very, very wrong. The next few weeks were BR Tao. My lawyer, Jonathan, was sharp. Thank God. But even he admitted this was tricky. If Alec and Mom convinced the court that I had improperly registered my business, I could lose everything. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I spent every waking hour gathering evidence, pulling bank statements, invoices, and emails, anything to prove that I had built my business with my own two hands. And then, I remembered something. My storage unit. Back when I was first getting started, when I was living in my car, I had scraped together just enough money to rent a tiny storage unit where I kept my tools and projects. I had receipts for every single payment I made to that unit. If I could prove I had been working out of there, and not Mom's house, then their entire case would fall apart. I dug through my emails and found the invoices. I even had photos from the early days, pictures of me working in that cramped little unit, my tools scattered across the floor. This was my smoking GN. I sent everything to my lawyer, and he whistled when he saw it. This is perfect. They're arguing that your mother's house was the foundation of your business. But this proves otherwise. I smirked. Then let's bury them. The court date came faster than I expected. I walked into that courtroom calm, collected, and ready for war. Alec was sitting at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a suit that was way too nice for him. Mom was right beside him, lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes cold as steel. She didn't even look at me. Fine. I didn't need her to. The trial started, and their lawyer went on about how I had unfairly used family resources and how Alec had contributed to the early success of the business. It was laughable. Then, it was our turn. Jonathan stood up, cool as ever, and dropped the bombshell. The storage unit. The receipts, the photos, the financial records. It was undeniable proof that I had been running my business independently, long before I was kicked out. The judge's expression shifted immediately. The momentum of the case swung hard in our favor. Then, to make things even better, Jonathan pulled up Alec's financial records, which we had subpoenaed. And wouldn't you know it, Alec hadn't made a single financial contribution to my business. Not a dime. Not even a loan. Meanwhile, I had bank statements showing that while I was pouring everything into my business, Alec was spending thousands on gambling, expensive sneakers, and weekend trips to Vegas. The judge looked pissed. Mom's lawyers started scrambling. Alec was turning red. And then came the final nail in the coffin. Jonathan pulled out a printed screenshot from 2 years ago, one of Alec's old Facebook posts. It read, "Man, my brother is working himself to death trying to start this business. I'd help, but not my thing. Hope he makes it big, though." Silence. Absolute silence. Alex's face was drained of color. Mom's lips tightened. Jonathan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I think that speaks for itself." The ruling was swift. Alex's claim, denied. His case, thrown out. And Mom, well, she sat there, stone-faced, as the judge ripped their entire argument apart. I could have walked out of that courtroom satisfied, but Jonathan had one more trick up his sleeve. I had countersued for legal fees and damages to my business reputation. And guess what? I won. Alec and Mom were ordered to pay me back for every penny I had spent fighting their ridiculous case. Alec looked like he was going to be sick. Mom still wouldn't look at me. I walked past them without a word. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten son. I felt victorious. And damn, it felt good. A month later, I got a call. It was Alec. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because for the first time ever, he finally understood. I didn't know him a damn thing.